Let's see who is sitting.
All right. Ready to go.
Okay, go.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for being here this afternoon. Well, it's funny, as I was getting ready this morning to moderate this afternoon, I was thinking to myself, I had the jitters, but I was also thinking to myself, why? Neither of us really know what I'm going to be talking about. So, with that thought, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be back on this stage, on the other side this time, moderating, and have the opportunity to spend this afternoon for the session with you all. My name is Snigdha Kaushik, and I'm a senior manager here at MNP, and I lead the Privacy and Data Protection Services. So, it's been a great morning with some really wonderful talks and some amazing speakers, so we're hoping to keep that track record this afternoon as well. So if you're here today, might be one of two things. Either you're really interested in learning about insider threats, or you're a bit concerned about one. But before we get into the topic, why don't we have our panelists introduce themselves? So over to you, Eugene.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Eugene Ng. I am a partner with MNP Cybersecurity team. I lead our security operations and technology implementation group, and really happy to be here today. I'll pass it over to Adriana.
Well, thank you, Eugene. And my name is Adriana Gliga-Belavic. I lead the National Data Protection and Privacy Practice. And I thought that this session is going to be quite interesting if we kind of have this back and forth between cybersecurity and privacy, because you can't have privacy without security. So that's what we are going to talk about today.
Great. Well, thank you both. So what do we mean by insider threats? Well, it can be defined as one of humanity's most perplexing and persistent security risks, but specifically the threat of harm from those that we trust. So over the past couple of years, we've seen a heightened awareness of insider threats due to numerous newsworthy attacks and breaches. And this is why we are here, to really understand and get into talking about some of the privacy and security challenges that organizations have seen. So with that thought, who's better to speak to some of these challenges and trends than our very own industry leaders? Eugene, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the trends that you've seen in the past couple of years, and how have they evolved?
I thought I was actually going to go second, but that's okay. So, like Snigdha mentioned, this concept of insider threat has been around for ages, but we're really seeing an increase just with the socioeconomic impact that COVID's had, economic impact on employees, just the proliferation of data as well, and what the data is actually worth. We're seeing collusion, right, between employees, contractors, trusted advisors within organizations working with threat actors to exfiltrate information, potentially launch ransomware attacks. The one example, I don't know if you guys read recently, there was an arrest made. I think the incident actually occurred in 2018. This internal IT security analyst was working in an organization. He was investigating a ransomware event within the organization. I think some of you have heard this. And what he did is he actually logged on to the executives' mailboxes, right? And changed the email address and the account for the transfer for the crypto payment for the ransomware decryption key to his own. And then in the course of the investigation, he tried to convince the senior executives to actually pay the ransom, of which it would be deposited directly into his account. Now, this happened in 2018, and he was just arrested recently, so which is why it made the headlines. But, we talk about insider threat being not very easy to identify because there's so many different avenues, and criminals are very savvy, creative in how they kind of deploy these threats into an environment. So that's my first story.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you shared that with us, with our audience, and that's actually a great segue into our next topic, which is about.
Just give me a second. So Eugene just talked about insider threat, from a cyber perspective and how you can use technology to do some of the things. But I think we shouldn't forget that insiders, some of the largest breaches that happen out there had nothing to do with technology. Actually had to do with insider either leaking information or taking entire customer databases out, or third parties that we trust, our insider third parties that we trust to get access to our information or process information. And so that's why we are talking about insider threats today. So not necessarily just with technology, but also with people who have access to the data, usually.
Well, that's great. And thank you for jumping in. And thank you for all of you for laughing, because that was by design. So, as I was mentioning, great segue into our next topic, which is about privacy of individuals. So like I was saying, over the past couple of years, we have seen a significant increase, but cyber threats have been more prevalent and more sophisticated, which is why we need to ensure that we're maintaining individuals' customer information and securing and protecting it. And Adriana, given that context and with changes to some of the regulations, what are your thoughts on how the Canadian and the global data and privacy laws are affecting organizations?
So I think if we look just at the last 3 years, we have seen a flurry of changes in legislation for privacy. And not only changes from the legislators, but really understanding from the public, understanding and awareness of what are you giving away every day. Okay, so it's a very complex environment. If we look just at Canada, we have Law 25 now in Quebec, which is similar to GDPR. We have the legislation that is federal legislation that is looking to make upgrades to our legislation. We have in Canada federal, provincial, municipal, and then we have healthcare legislation, so a very complex environment for organizations to manage. And then if you are, like most of Canadian organizations, multinational, now you have to manage the legislation around the world in all the geographies where you do business. So from an organizational perspective, a very complex environment to manage. And not just to manage from the customer perspective to maintain that trust, but how do you enable your business and maintain that trust with your customers is becoming very complex for organizations.
That's a really great point. And typically what we also see is silos between security and privacy, and we need to break them. And really, one of the ways to doing it is building a flexible program where organizations can be more agile and effective in the way they respond to some of these changes. So given that thought, here's our next slide. We'll get there. But essentially, we just want to see, what are your thoughts? So here's a question for our audience. How many of you know, just show of hands, what data you collect, how it flows through your organization, and where is it stored? Okay. There's some shy. We have a shy audience. Okay. So, Adriana and Eugene, with your experience, do you think organizations are good with understanding what data they're collecting and how it flows and where it's stored?
So talking from experience, a lot of organizations have no idea where their data is, what data they have, how important or critical that data is for their organization. And when we start talking about, if you want to do something with technology today, you need data governance. And everybody is up in arms. Where do we start? This is too complex. We can't really tackle it. So that's the first I hear from most organizations. But fortunately, now we have legislation with a little bit of teeth. So organizations do start to take some steps, maybe like small steps. So they might be looking at, okay, we have privacy legislation. Maybe we should understand what private information we are collecting from our customers. Maybe we should try to understand what are the data flows for those particular, what are the systems that we are using for processing for storing that information. But in most cases, I have to say, they start this process as a result of an incident. So they have a breach. Ransomware has been the #1 in the last 3 years. And then they start saying, OK, what did we lose? What data was where? Do we understand where data is? How our business is using it? And that there is a disconnect between how IT thinks the data is used and how the business actually uses the data. So that creates the complexity and the fact that data is everywhere within the organization.
Yeah, and Adriana, you talk about data flows of known knowns, right? So this is stuff that you are aware of, you document it. But I know working with our incident response teams at MNP, there's always this unknown unknown, right? So we'll use the Donald Rumsfeld, school of data. We've done investigations where the team's gone in, maybe it's a business email compromise, account takeover, and the HR professional has, a series of healthcare claims or WSIB claims, right, with social insurance numbers, personal health information, which then impacts everything else. And yes, we all know you're not supposed to use email to store stuff and to send sensitive and confidential information, but we have this challenge of the known knowns and now unfortunately, the unknown unknowns to deal with kind of where that data goes.
And I'll add another thing, we all went and worked from home straight from this conference in 2020. I remember closing the conference, going home for a Friday night, and never went to an office again for 3 years. So just imagine that. And then our organizations had to find a way to service customers and to allow us to work from home. So we changed business processes. We changed the way we interact with customers. We changed the way we provide services to our own employees. And we all tried to make it work. Nobody had time to stop and think, is this all very secure? Have we thought about these processes really well? Should we use email? So, we are just starting to see organizations coming back now and looking at, let's do a risk assessment of those processes. Have we put together the policies to manage those new processes? And right now, what are we doing? Going back to the office. So another change that is going to happen. And digitization happened overnight. So like Eugene said, a lot of organizations, they just lift and shift, took everything they had and move it to somewhere in the cloud. So now is the time to figure out what is and where it is and how important it is for our organization.
The only thing I would add is, I don't know if you guys came here for this presentation to actually get answers, but the challenge with insider threat, like hopefully we've taken the first few minutes to talk about how big the challenge is. We cannot solve. There is no silver bullet, and any session you go to, hopefully they're saying the same thing. They talk about restoring Active Directory. Cisco's here with their next-gen firewall and all sorts of stuff. There are just so many avenues of compromise. And this is something Adriana and I were on a call last week. So we also participate in some internal audit scoping discussions. And this very large entity, one of the things we kind of took out of that session is, we had risk experts from business continuity, third-party risk, finance, all sorts of, experts from MNP. And the conclusion from that meeting was basically how everything is bleeding into everything else, right? So we even just take a very simple topic like third-party risk, right? Are your suppliers financially viable? Do they measure up to cybersecurity standards? Like these are all pretty, basic things, I think, for third-party audit. But now we're talking about even consultants, right, in organizations. So how does the insider threat work with those consultants and the insider threat perspective? And so I think what's really important moving forward is how do we scope these projects or these challenges that we have into bite-sized chunks? And I think that's kind of the point that you're getting at.
Yeah, make it workable, because you can't tackle everything at the same time.
Yeah, so there's no answers, basically.
Start small
Okay.
and build on it.
All right.
And be flexible. But those are some really great points that you both made. And that brings us to the next topic of access control. So, second question for our audience. How many of you think you have good access controls to the most sensitive data? Just show of hands.
One, maybe two.
Okay. Okay, a few more. Okay. Well, I'm glad we're on this topic. So we've also seen some of this at our clients as well. So based on your experience, Adriana, do you think organizations are good at protecting their sensitive data?
Maybe I'll talk from the perspective of the organization, and especially because I'm talking privacy and sensitive data. So a lot of organizations in financial services, in healthcare, they have a need to give a lot of access to people because they have to provide services. So you can't be showing up at the hospital and somebody says, sorry, you're not my patient, so let me bring your nurse to talk to you. So you have to be able to back somebody up, to be available to provide the service. Same if you go to your bank. You want to be able to do whatever you want. So that kind of gave the organization the pass to give more access than maybe needed to the employees to be able to service clients. So what does that mean now from an insider perspective? You have a lot of people with a lot of access to a lot of data. Do you know what they are doing with it? Do you understand how they use it? Do you even understand if they misuse it? So that's becoming a big challenge for organizations. So maybe, Eugene, if you want to talk a little bit about what our organization is doing from an access perspective.
Yeah. So we all know if the user account no longer works there, you decommission. All that stuff is, I think, pretty standard these days for organizations. But like Adriana mentioned, how they're actually using that data and how to create security models to identify and detect that behavior is really hard. I think you're going to share some stuff on your case study. Okay, so I'll leave that for Adriana to talk about, but I'll tell you a little bit about from a Security Operations Center what we do to monitor insider threat behavior. We were doing an investigation for a large organization here in the GTA. They had a suspicious internal IT administrator that was doing some what they thought was nefarious activity. And so what we did with our incident response team is we deployed sensors on the endpoint, we deployed sensors on the network, just to look for suspicious behavior. At the end of the day, there was a data model that recently came out on the NDR side that basically said, from this user account, have they exfiltrated a lot of data prior to an account being disabled? So before the user actually left, right, to go to another job or whatever, did they take a bunch of customer files, intellectual property? And then there was also a model where you can see whether or not it was exfiltrated to a cloud service provider like Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever it is. So we have some of these data models today that can identify at least suspicious behavior, but again, it's that context, right, of is it actually insider threat, or is this individual just working really hard on 3 a.m. on a weekday and trying to back up their data because they're getting a new laptop? Who knows? But those are some of the things that that we're working on to try to identify some of that behavior.
Good point. And I think if you look historically, really organizations put a lot more effort into access, and everybody introduced identity and access management because that was something that was tested and audited, and if you are in financial services, you had, the OSFI asking you to do it. So I think, we have a history on identity and access management. It's just how do we take that to the next level? And a lot of organizations will have some kind of controls and monitoring around the privilege access. Like, the IT people who have a lot of access to systems. But we don't see a lot happening from the business perspective, a lot of understanding on how the business uses data. a lot of understanding of, and moving towards the, the models, behavior models for access, that becomes now very important for organizations. How do you build a behavior access management into the organization if you don't understand what data you have and how people use it?
Yeah, and I think it's challenging too, just the size of organization. I don't know for all of you in the room, but we were at a conference last week, and somebody stood up and said, well, I basically scare all my employees that we're monitoring everything, and I review logs, I think daily she mentioned, or maybe weekly, I can't remember exactly. And we're like, well, how big's the organization? Well, we have 15 people, right? So what works there on I guess a shoestring budget is great, but for 15,000, it's a completely different story.
Yeah, for sure.
So then it might be fair to say it's a mix where some organizations are better than others. And of course, it's important to implement the right level of access controls, but it's just as important to monitor how the data is being used and if it's being used as intended. So since you're such a great audience, we have another question for you all. So last question, how many of you have a good understanding of how data is used by those employees that have the most access? Okay, a few. Any more? Okay, so let's start with Eugene. I know I've been starting with you, Adriana, throwing all the questions at you. So Eugene, with your perspective, how good would you say organizations are with understanding how they're using the data and who has the most amount of access?
I'll share, I mean, it ranges, of course. I'll share a story. So we were investigating an incident, and it was a trusted third-party contractor that was doing software development in Eastern Europe. That developer hadn't been working in this organization for probably 3 or 4 years. They had a developer VPN account. Password hadn't been changed in years. Those credentials were sold on the dark web. They connected into the organization's environment. That account had domain admin credentials. We talk about dwell time, I think. I don't know if it's on this one here. No, there's another slide, I think, Snigdha, about dwell time, like basically the time where a threat actor enters the environment to when they launch their malicious activity. So usually it's kind of in the 100 and something days to 200 and something, depending on which report you read. For this one here, it was less than 24 hours when the threat actor purchased the credentials, logged on, identified that they had access, and then basically launched their attack within 22 hours. So to go back to the question, because I kind of drone on a bit in circles, is they were aware that they had this third-party trusted developer, but again, it's just such a daunting task, right? Because you're using so many third parties, so many service providers to do this work, that I would say for most of the time when we do our incident response, it's probably a lack of that control, for sure.
And I'll share again from the business side. So we were working with customer in financial services in a smaller geography. We are doing facilitated workshops to understand how business was dealing with data, and we asked them, what access do you have? How do you deal with everyday tasks? And one of the people we are interviewing said to us, oh, my cousin just calls me, and I pay her bills. I was like, what? So how the organization thinks that the employees are using the data versus how the employees actually find ways to use the data. Now, it was a small organization. We trust everybody who works here. That was the culture of the organization. But that was what people were doing there. They will they had access to the back-end accounts, and why not pay the bills of their families? So now, let's just say this was about a decade ago, but even today, if you are asking the employees how do they do their job, I'm sure it's not just how it's written in the user manual. So being able to understand some of those things and understand at what times they work. You know, we thought at one point with another customer that, you know, if we see something happening on a Saturday night or Sunday, that will be something that should be flagged. But then we found out, oh, this type of employees, they usually prepare Saturday night or Sunday for their whole week. And this is regular behavior. So you really need to understand from the business perspective how your employees are actually doing their job every day and what makes the normal course of behavior for them.
I would also add, those of you that put your hand up to say you've documented data flows, I would also challenge you to think how easy it would be for you to steal data from your organization. Super easy, right? And that's the challenge that we all face. So when we talk about, well, I shouldn't say we, well, I guess we. When we talk about taking things in bite-sized chunks, I know one of the things you guys, you gals, always talk about starting is the crown jewels assessment, right? And I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about that process, but.
Yeah, understand what is important to the organization. So, you know, risk-based approach to everything. You wanted to protect what is the most sensitive and the most important to the organization, and if that's gonna go away, your organization is not gonna function tomorrow. So that's where you have to start, focusing on that, understanding what that is, and start with that.
Yeah.
Take small steps and build on it as you go.
Because you're not gonna stop every exfiltration avenue.
But at least you build understanding.
Exactly, because the other story that I have is, you know, there's an organization that's got their, you know, Dropbox secured, there's no USB access, all the drives are encrypted, you know, DLP through email and all that kind of stuff, and then somebody from the audit committee says, well, can't they just take a picture of the screen? Yeah, I mean, so again, it's this kind of risk, reward, and effort debacle that we constantly face, so.
No, those are some very interesting points and very good points. It is, of course, there's no one size fits all, so it has to be very tailored to the size of your organizations, but also the different teams that you have. And it's important to have a more integrated approach within these different teams. So that being said, do you think work from home has increased the threat of insiders?
Me? Well, I guess, you know, you are at home. There's nobody to look over your shoulder, so you might have some ideas. And it's also, I think you are away from, I think somebody asked us on a previous presentation that we did, how do you prevent this from an inside perspective? What's the culture of the organization? So it's very important to have that culture within the organization. So to trust that wherever your employees are, if they are at home or in the office, they are gonna manage the data the same way. And really, it's not only that, but we are at home, we have our families around us. I know I camped in, you know, the dining room table for 3 years, so it's not like I'm locked into an office. So it's important to understand who walks by, who listens to what you say. You know, where do you store the paper or the disks or whatever data? And we had customers that were saying, well, we had to operate. We shipped boxes of data to people's homes because they had to do their job. So what happened to those boxes of paper? How were they stored? So obviously, you know, there were more opportunities for data leakage and for somebody to come in the house and ask you a question, find out about what you are working about, or if you are in the office, that wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if, do you guys know who MNP is? Have you heard of MNP? Yeah? Okay. Well, then I won't go into anyways, We also have an accounting side to the business. That's probably primarily what we're known for. But we can take a lot of lessons from financial services and financial audit approach to insider threat. Because as much or as long as we've been dealing with cybersecurity in this room, insider fraud for financial has been going on even longer, right? So a lot of their approaches we can take to try to help combat some of these things in cyber. So I think we have another slide. Maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit.
Next one.
Oh, that's the next slide? Okay, well.
Just move it to the next one.
Okay,
framework.
Yeah, maybe the next one, if that's okay. And the reason I talk about this is because in the financial services or in the financial audit space, you know, what's one way that you can help address or deal with insider risk? Doing spot checks, spot audits, creating specific KPIs, KRIs, and KCIs, both on a privacy side and also a cybersecurity side. So there, and we'll talk more about some other things that we can learn from financial audit, financial services, but again, just some different approaches to kind of get the mind flowing a little bit.
So based on what you both have said so far, really, because of all the changes to the regulatory landscape and the processes as well, and given COVID, organizations obviously have had to fast track and implement processes and technologies to ensure they're keeping up with those changes. So that being said, now that we understand some of the trends and some of the challenges, what can organizations do to essentially address some of these challenges?
And I guess we already talked about a lot of them, but we thought we are going to put them in a nice diagram for you guys. So, you know, we talk about, and it's a 3-layer approach, okay? So first is that understanding. What you have, what you are trying to protect, how is the business using it, what do you actually have in terms of logs, like how do you know what is there? And then in the second part is what IT can do. What tools do you have today within your organization that can correlate those two? So if I know from a business perspective how it's supposed to work, and now I have things from an IT perspective that monitors the environment, how do we use this together to build a model, and that's the middle part there. How do we build a model to monitor? And you know, we don't want to know after the fact. So most of the KPIs used to be about incidents. Well, what's the point if you already had an incident? So how do you build something that is going to help you proactively identify if there might be an issue within the organization? So define what's the outcome, what do you want to know, and then what data is available to you, and engage your data analysts, data engineers. You know, organizations now are looking to see using machine learning, AI, because you can't do this on spreadsheets anymore. There is a lot of data that you need to put into these models. And then start somewhere, define the criteria that you wanted to monitor, and learn from it. Involve all the parties, correlate the information, figure out what might be an event or an incident. I mean, we've been doing this incident management for a long time. Why can't we do it about the data as well? And the user behavior. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of a diagram in there. And then as you learn, figure out, okay, this data, maybe data points are not that important. Drop them. Build something else in such a way to give you the outcome that you want to have.
But it's not easy.
It's not easy.
Adriana, why don't you share? So we have one joint client that was having challenges of bringing people back to the office. I'm sure everyone has the same challenge. But you probably tell the story better, but they have a set of employees that are forced to come back to the office and a set of employees that, I guess, don't.
They were okay to work from home.
Okay to work from home. And the people that were in the office were complaining that they had to pay for gas, pay for parking, pay for mileage, and they were concerned that the people working from home were not working. So maybe just expand on that.
So then the organization said, okay, we'll implement some employee monitoring software. And this was an environment with a union. They went to the union. They asked the employees. They said, okay. They went to the union. The union said, okay. And then Eugene went in there and said,
Are you crazy?
what are you doing? What data are you collecting through this monitoring that you are doing of your employees? Have you even looked at what are the risks?
Because this software, and there's a bunch of them out there, they market themselves as saying, keep an eye on your remote employees, make sure they're being productive, and also dealing with insider threat. And yeah, just the privacy impact. You can take screenshots of the user's workstation if they're on Facebook, email and collaboration. Like
Anything.
It's pretty
Keystrokes.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. But very intrusive, right? So when we talk about these little puzzle pieces, again, in bite-sized chunks, while it may seem like a great idea, and I don't know, are they moving forward with it? I don't.
We'll do a PIA.
Okay.
We'll find out.
And see what happens. But just all these things to kind of consider, and we're only talking again about a very small subset of the organization. So.
Yeah. So it's about collaboration, about deciding what the outcome you want, and then build the model, try it out.
Yeah, and the one other one, sorry, just in the top right, again, just some lessons learned from our accounting friends is the ability, again, for insider misuse is the whistleblower hotline. So really focusing, and I know we talk about this, I'm sure, in other presentations about culture, right? Cybersecurity awareness and education. It's important as well from an insider threat perspective that people have a place to go to kind of share if they suspect something's actually happening. Because I was reading a stat preparing for this, 85% of insider threat incidents, other people in the firm actually knew that this individual was planning on doing something malicious. So again, taking lessons from other areas of the business to apply to our challenge here.
And I'll share a little bit about one project that we are doing with a financial institution. So we really started with an audit issue. Somebody left with a client database. So, the organization asked, okay, what are you going to do about it? So they said, okay, let's try to figure it out. They defined some data points. They thought, oh, maybe it's important to know how far they are from the branch, or are they their clients or not, or how do they work? What are the different roles? So we started small. We started with a couple of roles in a branch. And we defined those 4 different criteria that we are going to look at. But we decided there to also include, when we looked at the model, we decided, okay, we are going to look at this model from the perspective, how is their behavior different from themselves within a month, but also how is different relative to all the other people in the same job role. And some of the outcomes that we actually got were people who were ready to leave started checking out their own peers' accounts because they wanted to know what they should be asking for in the next job. So what we started doing, correlating that kind of information from HR when they provided us with information, these people put in their resignation. And then we looked back to see, well, have they done anything before, but are they doing anything different now? And we started to actually see who is going to put on their resignation based on the behavior that they showed. That, they were checking out their peers, they were checking different geographies, they were checking. So you see, so sometimes you get unintended results from where you started with the model, but be open and see where the model takes you. We thought geography was very important, and then after a couple of months, we gave up on geography because we realized if it's a big city, everybody comes to work there. So they will look at people from all different cities, or if it's a university city, there will be students from across the country, so even provinces will not matter. Or if it's a small community, they will only have one branch for 100 kilometers, so they will service everybody within that radius. So we just gave up on it. We said, like, okay, this is not important. Let's just eliminate it from the model. So, you learn as you go, and sometimes you get unintended results that actually start to give you more information than you thought they will give you.
I don't know if you've heard, but they do say it takes an audit or a breach to find issues that you weren't even looking for. Well, really, thank you both, Adriana and Eugene, for chiming in and sharing some of your experiences with this case study, because I'm sure a lot of our audience can, take some of the information that you've shared, and it's always good to see some of these concepts being played out in practice. So really, just to sort of summarize, defining the user behavior, the baseline, is very important. Building a framework to manage the data based on the business context and the operational reach, and based on that, making the right level of investments into your people, process, and technologies is ultimately really the key for your overall organization. So I know we've been talking a lot. It would be wonderful for our audience to also, share any of your experiences, or if you have any questions for us. Okay, so I see a hand in the back.
So, do you think for insider threats we could use zero trust architecture to deal with it?
Could you?
Can you use zero trust architecture to deal with insider threat?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. All facets of it. So, authentication, segmentation, SASE-based kind of access to cloud applications. Yeah, you can start to kind of develop a behavior pattern, like what we were talking about earlier, about monitoring for that access. But again, I think, so zero trust is a great framework, but again, if you take a step back and look at the crown jewels of an organization, sometimes that won't even pass through potentially where zero trust gives you that visibility. It could be something completely different. And I think that's the challenge, is people try to do this in silos. Like, one of the reasons it's great that, well, I think it's great that the cyber team and the privacy team can kind of work together, is because we have different perspectives on how to solve similar challenges. And I think that's also one of the requirements moving forward for the business, is it can't be done by either team. It has to be done in conjunction, and zero trust is just one of those components that'll make up a solution, I think.
Thank you. Also, I have another question. So you mentioned a lot about user behavior analysis. As a cybersecurity student, do you think that's an important skill, to get data analytics skill, to process such information? Is that a skill that would be required for cybersecurity positions?
I think the skills of the future will include everything. So there is no more, I'm going to be doing cybersecurity and I need to have a technical background. Because if we look at how our teams look like today, we have people with criminalistic background, lawyers, data scientists, obviously engineers, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. But yes, it's a combination. And data scientists, definitely, because we'll need to solve these problems. And it's all about the data. So they need to help us figure it out. How do we stay ahead of insiders, but also the outside attackers as well?
Thank you.
Okay, we'll have another question over there.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful. You mentioned subcontractors or third parties, but when you go a level further, when you have your third party, besides writing privacy and security requirements in a contract, Like, what other tools can you use to make sure there isn't an insider threat? It becomes pretty difficult in my experience.
It's a great question. You're talking like fourth party, fifth party
Fourth
kind
party,
of stuff, right?
fifth party.
So your service provider.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts. One is a little bit out there, because you can do the regular, I'll mention some product names, like BitSight, Risk Recon, like some of those third-party cyber credit score reports. So that's one potential avenue. The other one is exactly what you said in contract review, and I'm sure legal will have a field day on it. I have a unique approach, is you take a data-first approach. So again, if you identify your crown jewels, there are also companies out there that will do external threat posture assessments. So they'll be looking for your data in things like GitHub, S3 buckets, those kinds of repositories. Maybe they're unsecured, maybe it's a co-op student that's, put a hard-coded API key somewhere. But these companies will actually look for that data consistently across the internet, and they'll flag you if it's been identified, so that then you can kind of laser focus and say, well, how has this data actually gotten here? And that's where you can kind of trace back to see and maybe delete and remediate it after that fact. So those are just maybe some ideas. I don't know.
And I'll just say, it's great that we put all these things in contracts. If you don't monitor them, what's the point of having contracts? So it's not just about putting the things in the contracts, it's doing something about it, making sure that those contracts says, if you are engaging with a third party or moving my information to the cloud, you have to tell me about it. And monitor that over time. Go ahead.
Thank you. I really love the expression you used where you said that you have your known knowns and your unknown unknowns.
That's not mine, by the way. It's
But
Donald Brown's.
it's very accurate, especially when you're trying to understand data flows through an organization. So do you have any method that you use to somehow tease out the unknown unknowns? How do you tackle that?
I guess we have a couple of them. We invite the business and IT at the same meeting, and we let the business tell us how they use the data, and then IT tell us how the applications work. And they never have the same idea. So we find that all the time. And then what we also found, especially with the incidents, we do scan the organization's data, and most of the times they find out that they have data where they never thought they will have data.
So you can do spot checks.
You can do both. So, but don't use just one because you go and clean it up, and if you don't understand what the process is, you are going to put it back there.
Okay, great. Well, those were really great questions, and thank you, everybody. But before we wrap things up, Adriana, Eugene, do you have any final thoughts for our audience? I know we've given them a lot to think about, a lot to take away, but any final thoughts?
Collaboration. Don't go at it alone. Talk to your colleagues. I was asked at one presentation I was doing at the conference, I was talking about payment card data, and they said, they said, how do I talk to the privacy people? I said, pick up the phone and call them. It's like, really? Like, don't go at it alone. We keep saying collaboration, but it's important to talk to people around you.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just, like I said, bite-sized chunks. Don't try to boil the ocean, for sure, for this one.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.